I finally built a secure sanctuary. That illusion of safety completely shattered the moment I stood frozen in shock, staring at my phone screen while watching my parents and my sister secretly breaking into my house. Seeing the very blood relatives I trusted most turn my private space into a place to freely rummage made my entire worldview collapse instantly. I decided to face them directly without any hesitation or room for negotiation when they finally stood before me. Looking them straight in the eyes during our confrontation, I delivered a clear warning: "You have exactly 72 hours to fix everything." Instead of showing even a single ounce of remorse or fear for their actions, they actually burst into mocking laughter right in my face. They treated my serious ultimatum as some kind of cheap joke coming from a daughter they believed could easily be bullied into silence. Realizing there was absolutely no point in making further concessions for people who felt so entitled to my belongings, I immediately turned my back on them. I pulled out my cell phone and decisively dialed 911 to permanently end this toxic illusion of family loyalty. If you have ever been completely betrayed by the exact people who tore down my toxic family tree to save myself. Moving into my new house in a modern urban area of Boise, Idaho, was supposed to be the official start of my independent life, but it rapidly transformed into a bottomless ATM for my family. I am currently 34 years old and have spent my entire adult life working relentlessly to build a stable career as a marketing director. However, every promotion and salary increase I earned was immediately overshadowed by an unspoken obligation to unconditionally support my sister Mallory, who is 36, but still relies entirely on others for her survival. My parents mastered the art of using intense psychological pressure and weaponized parental love to force my hand whenever her bills needed to be paid. They constantly manipulated me into funding a lavish lifestyle that far exceeded anything Mallory could actually afford on her own. During a rare moment of emotional vulnerability shortly after I unpacked my boxes in the new house, I made a catastrophic mistake that would haunt me later. Mom called me late one evening claiming they needed emergency access to my property, just in case someone suffered a sudden medical crisis while I was traveling for work. Trusting their fabricated concern without a single shred of suspicion, I foolishly provided them with the master electronic passcode to my front door. I truly believed I was doing the right thing for my family by ensuring they had a safety net during unpredictable situations. I never imagined that this specific act of goodwill would become the very tool they used to invade my private sanctuary. It did not take long for that misplaced trust to backfire completely as their financial demands grew increasingly brazen. A phone call starting with a casual greeting would inevitably pivot into an aggressive request to cover Mallory's overdue apartment rent, or to pay for an expensive vacation she booked without actually having the funds. One evening stands out clearly in my memory when Mom demanded I transfer $2,000 to cover a luxury shopping debt Mallory had foolishly accumulated. When I tried to firmly decline that absurd request by explaining I had my own heavy mortgage to worry about, Mom immediately started sobbing dramatically into the receiver. Dad then aggressively snatched the phone from her hands and began scolding me loudly for being a selfish daughter who completely abandoned her own flesh and blood. He firmly stated that family must always share everything, and that my financial success meant absolutely nothing if I refused to help them out. They genuinely operated under the delusion that my hard-earned bank account was a communal family budget that they possessed the absolute right to drain at their convenience. Whenever I refused to comply immediately, Mallory would flood my phone with guilt, tripping voicemails accusing me of letting the family starve. If I ever dared to bring up the concept of personal boundaries, they would instantly twist my words to make me feel like the ultimate villain of the story. The relentless cycle of financial extortion slowly drained my mental energy until a feeling of sheer exhaustion settled permanently deep into my bones. Every time my phone rang with their contact photos flashing on the bright screen, a heavy knot of anxiety would instantly form in my stomach. I found myself working late hours at the marketing firm just to avoid going home to the constant barrage of manipulative text messages demanding more financial assistance. My personal boundaries were constantly being trampled over by my own family members under the deceptive guise of unconditional familial loyalty and blood relations. I finally realized that my role in their lives was solely defined by my ability to generate income for their endless convenience. This suffocating environment eventually awakened a profound and unsettling suspicion within me regarding the true nature of the people I had always called my blood relatives. I started noticing small inconsistencies in their stories and the strange way they looked at my possessions whenever they visited my new home. The affectionate smiles they gave me always felt incredibly hollow and perfectly timed to coincide with their next major request for a financial bailout. I was slowly waking up to the terrifying reality that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally only loved what my wallet could provide for them. On a gloomy late October afternoon, the faint suspicions lingering in my mind officially transformed into a tangible fear that I could no longer ignore. I started noticing unusual disturbances around my living space when several expensive branded accessories suddenly vanished without a single trace left behind. I initially tried to deceive myself by attributing these mysterious disappearances to severe mental exhaustion resulting from my highly demanding corporate marketing job at the firm. Whenever a premium bottle of imported perfume or a customized designer leather jacket went missing from my carefully organized closet, I would desperately convince myself that I had simply misplaced them in a rush. The immense pressure of managing large promotional campaigns made it incredibly easy to blame my own deteriorating memory for the strange occurrences happening inside my sanctuary. I absolutely refused to entertain the horrifying thought that someone might be intentionally violating the sanctity of my home while I was away at the office working long hours to pay the mortgage. The true devastating shock finally arrived during a weekend cleaning session when I decided to organize a tightly secured private drawer located inside my home office. I immediately discovered that the priceless heirloom watch previously belonging to my grandfather had completely vanished into thin air without leaving any physical clues behind. That specific vintage timepiece carried immense sentimental value because it was the only physical memory I had left of him after he passed away many years ago during my childhood. I spent several exhausting hours frantically tearing my office apart while pulling out every single folder to search beneath every piece of heavy furniture in a desperate panic. Staring at the empty velvet box sitting inside the drawer forced me to confront the undeniable reality that these serial disappearances were definitely not accidental misplacements anymore. Seeking some form of twisted reassurance during a regular weekend phone call, I deliberately mentioned the missing item to gently probe for any unusual reactions from my family. "Did you happen to see my grandfather's watch resting on the desk?" I carefully asked over the phone, while tightly gripping the cold kitchen counter with trembling fingers. "You are constantly losing your belongings because of your workaholic habits, so do not go around blaming anyone else." Mom responded in a harsh, cold tone that lacked any maternal warmth. Her immediate defensive hostility regarding a cherished family heirloom immediately sent a freezing chill straight down my spine as I processed her bizarre lack of concern. The conversation abruptly ended shortly after her dismissive remark to leave me completely suffocated by the heavy realization that my own mother was actively gaslighting me to cover up a much darker truth. Completely unable to endure the suffocating sense of insecurity any longer, I decided to take immediate covert action to protect my personal territory from further invisible threats. I quietly contacted a highly recommended professional technician to secretly install a sophisticated system of microsecurity cameras entirely hidden from plain sight inside my residence. The skilled technician strategically positioned the tiny recording devices inside decorative plants and various blind spots throughout the main living room, along with the central hallway connecting the bedrooms. The entire installation process was carefully conducted with the utmost secrecy to ensure that absolutely no one could visually detect the presence of the advanced surveillance equipment. I desperately needed undeniable visual proof to finally confirm the dark theories that were actively tormenting my mind every single time I stepped out the front door to attend my corporate meetings. Taking the final decisive defensive step to secure my perimeter against further unauthorized intrusions, I completely overhauled the access protocols for my entire property later that same evening. I personally navigated the complex digital settings of my modern electronic front door lock to meticulously wipe the internal system clean of all previous entry codes stored in its memory. After permanently erasing the old numbers previously given to my family for medical emergencies, I established a brand new complex passcode sequence that was virtually impossible for anyone to guess randomly. I maintained absolute silence regarding this critical security update and deliberately chose not to provide this new numerical sequence to my parents or my sister Mallory. Locking the heavy door behind me that morning finally gave me a small semblance of psychological control over the rapidly deteriorating situation happening inside my own walls. Around 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning that week, the cell phone resting on my office desk rang frantically with Mom's name continuously flashing across the bright screen. The moment I swiped the green icon to accept the incoming call, she immediately launched into an aggressive verbal assault regarding my newly updated security protocols. Why is the electronic passcode to your front door completely failing to work right now because we are currently standing outside on the porch waiting for you? Mom yelled loudly through the phone speaker with intense frustration. I could clearly hear Dad complaining bitterly in the background about how their habitual free access to my private property was suddenly obstructed without prior notice. Their overwhelming sense of entitlement over my personal sanctuary was blatantly obvious through every single demanding word they aggressively directed at me during that chaotic phone conversation. I held my breath deeply to successfully suppress the burning rage slowly bubbling up inside my chest before delivering a perfectly calculated lie to counter their unreasonable outrage. The electronic lock short-circuited this morning, so I am currently waiting for the warranty technician to inspect it. I coldly replied to her incredibly brazen questioning without showing any emotion. I deliberately chose to completely ignore their escalating irritability because I absolutely refused to entertain their toxic behavior while sitting inside my professional corporate environment surrounded by colleagues. Mom continued to grumble incoherently about the massive inconvenience I supposedly caused them before abruptly terminating the connection in a fit of dramatic, childish anger. The sheer audacity required to call or complain about being locked out of a house they did not actually own left me trembling with absolute disgust along with profound disbelief. The fragile illusion of peace lasted until exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, while I was actively leading a highly critical marketing strategy presentation in the main conference room. The sophisticated security application installed on my smartphone suddenly vibrated violently while displaying a bright red emergency notification warning me about an active intrusion detected on the premises. A massive wave of cold dread instantly washed over my entire body as my heart hammered violently against my ribcage in response to the terrifying digital alert flashing continuously. I desperately needed to maintain my professional composure in front of the executive board members, despite the overwhelming panic threatening to completely consume my rational thought process. I politely excused myself from the ongoing corporate meeting under the realistic pretense of an urgent client matter before quickly stepping out into the completely deserted office hallway. My hands shook uncontrollably as I tapped the glowing notification icon to open the live surveillance feed, streaming directly from the newly installed hidden cameras inside my residence. I stood completely frozen in absolute horror while watching the crystal-clear video footage broadcasting the exact nightmare I had desperately prayed would never actually materialize in reality. My parents, along with Mallory, were physically struggling to squeeze their bodies through the narrow side window located near the garage area to illegally breach the perimeter of my home. The surreal visual of my own blood relatives actively committing a home invasion shattered the final remaining fragments of my broken heart into a million irreparable pieces. They tumbled awkwardly onto the garage floor before casually dusting off their clothes to march directly into my living room like they rightfully owned the entire property. Returning to my house later that evening felt exactly like stepping inside a contaminated crime scene that had been thoroughly violated by the people I once foolishly trusted. The stale air inside the hallway felt incredibly heavy as I meticulously inspected the various areas where they had shamelessly rummaged through my personal belongings earlier that afternoon. I immediately walked straight into my home office to securely connect the central surveillance hub directly to my personal computer system to preserve the undeniable digital evidence. I sat in the hauntingly quiet room for several exhausting hours while silently downloading every single gigabyte of high-definition video footage onto an encrypted external hard drive. This indestructible ironclad proof would serve as my ultimate weapon against the endless gaslighting along with any psychological manipulation they would inevitably unleash upon me during our upcoming confrontation. I securely locked the small digital storage device inside my leather briefcase, while mentally preparing myself for the brutal emotional warfare destined to erupt the very next morning. The next morning, I drove straight to my parents' house with an incredibly chilling silence completely engulfing my entire chest as I parked my car. I confidently marched directly into their cluttered living room, where the entire family had gathered around the coffee table for their usual relaxing morning routine. I firmly demanded an immediate conversation regarding the obvious disappearances happening inside my residence over the past few weeks without showing any fear. I stated with absolute clarity that I knew exactly who had been sneaking into my property to steal my valuable belongings while I was away at work. I intentionally kept my expression completely stoic while deliberately withholding the crucial information regarding the hidden security cameras currently monitoring every single corner of my home. I desperately needed to witness their unfiltered reactions to determine just how deeply their deception and sense of entitlement truly ran. Instead of displaying even a microscopic ounce of embarrassment or genuine remorse for their unforgivable actions, their reaction was purely explosive hostility. Mallory immediately jumped up from the couch alongside Mom and Dad to launch a vicious verbal assault against my character. They loudly humiliated me by calling me a paranoid lunatic who was cruelly fabricating malicious lies to destroy her own blood relatives. Dad aggressively stepped forward into my personal space while forcefully demanding that I leave his property before I caused any further irreversible damage to the family reputation that they had built over decades. Mom dramatically clutched her chest while sobbing loudly about how she had utterly failed at raising a daughter who could falsely accuse her own family of criminal behavior. Their collective gaslighting was so incredibly synchronized that anyone without irrefutable video evidence safely stored on an external hard drive would have easily doubted their own sanity. I stood my ground against their coordinated intimidation tactics while staring directly into the deeply deceitful eyes of the people who raised me. The sheer audacity they possessed to violently twist the narrative while actively harboring my stolen possessions somewhere inside their own house fueled my cold determination. "You have exactly 72 hours to return everything intact." I growled heavily while sharply cutting through their endless stream of defensive insults. That specific declaration was delivered as a razor-sharp warning, leaving absolutely no room for any future negotiations or emotional leniency. I wanted them to fully understand that the era of treating me like their personal financial doormat had officially reached a permanent conclusion. My serious ultimatum was immediately drowned out by the incredibly grating sound of Mallory bursting into a fit of contemptuous, mocking laughter. She completely dismissed the severity of the situation by treating my strict deadline as nothing more than a pathetic bluff from a weak sibling. "You are completely crazy. Just try to overreact and see who actually believes a selfish person like you." Mallory sneered loudly while aggressively waving her hand pointing straight at the front door. She threw a deeply disdainful look in my direction, while confidently repositioning herself on the living room sofa like a triumphant queen. The absolute certainty in her voice proved that she genuinely believed their status as my biological family granted them total immunity from any real consequences. I turned around to exit the hostile environment while carrying an overwhelming sense of choking frustration burning intensely inside my throat. The drive back to my own house felt like navigating through a thick fog of betrayal because the reality of their remorseless cruelty was finally sinking in. The moment I collapsed onto my living room couch to catch my breath, I instinctively opened my social media application to distract my racing mind. I was immediately confronted by a massive digital wall of text, posted by Mallory, that perfectly executed her ultimate victim-playing strategy designed to manipulate public opinion. She had completely twisted the truth of our morning confrontation to maliciously smear my reputation in front of our entire extended network of relatives and mutual friends online. The lengthy post painted her as a struggling innocent sibling being mercilessly terrorized by a wealthy sister who prioritized material possessions over basic family loyalty and compassion. Reading those highly fabricated accusations publicly validating their toxic delusions permanently cemented my resolve to proceed with the ultimate legal destruction of our relationship without looking back. 2 days after that incredibly malicious defamation post appeared online, I found myself sitting directly across from a man wearing a sharp gray suit inside a remarkably quiet downtown office. I officially introduced my lawyer, Brian, who meticulously reviewed every single piece of digital evidence stored on the encrypted hard drives I had carefully provided him earlier that morning. He sat perfectly still behind his massive mahogany desk while carefully analyzing the high-definition video footage, capturing my family unlawfully infiltrating my private property. We were actively building an airtight legal case, specifically targeting the severe felonies of unauthorized breaking and entering, along with the grand larceny of my highly valuable personal assets. The undeniable visual proof combined with the detailed inventory list of missing heirlooms created an incredibly solid foundation for the impending prosecution against the perpetrators. The total financial value of the stolen designer goods and the vintage watch easily elevated the upcoming criminal charges to a level that carried significant legal penalties. Watching an experienced legal professional react with genuine visible shock at the sheer audacity of my parents, and Mallory thoroughly validated the extreme severity of the crimes committed against me. Brian efficiently outlined a ruthlessly cold legal strategy designed to maximize the consequences for their blatant disrespect of my personal boundaries, alongside my fundamental property rights. He proactively prepared all the necessary civil restraining orders alongside the comprehensive litigation documents required to initiate a formal criminal investigation without any unnecessary delay. We collectively agreed to simply wait patiently for the invisible 72-hour countdown clock to strike its final second before taking any irreversible aggressive legal action. Once that specific deadline officially expired without a full return of my stolen property, Brian would immediately submit the entire evidence package directly to the Boise Police Department. There would be absolutely no further warnings or opportunities for my family to negotiate their way out of the severe legal trouble they had willingly walked right into. Shortly after leaving that highly professional law office feeling mentally exhausted but legally secure, I drove straight toward the quiet suburbs to seek some desperately needed emotional stability. I arrived at the cozy suburban residence belonging to my Aunt Martha, who was the only biological relative who never blindly followed the manipulative narratives constantly spun by my parents. I sat down at her vintage wooden kitchen table while pouring out the entire horrifying truth regarding the systemic financial abuse, alongside the recent home invasion. I even showed her the downloaded video footage on my tablet so she could witness the undeniable reality of her own sibling actively participating in the burglary of my sanctuary. Seeing the profound disappointment washing over her aging face as she watched the surveillance footage proved that my decision to pursue strict legal action was completely justified. I was initially terrified that she would utilize her position as a family elder to guilt-trip me into maintaining the toxic peace just like everyone else always did. Instead of delivering a predictable lecture about the sacred nature of family forgiveness, or demanding that I drop the charges, she looked straight into my tired eyes with absolute clarity. They have mercilessly exploited you for many years, so please do not let any fake guilt stop you from claiming your rightful justice, Martha stated while placing her warm hand heavily upon my trembling shoulder with an incredibly firm voice. I am absolutely not backing down anymore, because the time for endless endurance has officially expired, I replied confidently while feeling a brand new surge of undeniable strength completely flooding my entire mind. Receiving such powerful validation from a respected older family member effectively extinguished the final microscopic remnants of misplaced guilt lingering deeply inside my wounded heart. The suffocating grief surrounding the painful death of my fabricated family unit rapidly transformed into an unbreakable iron will focused entirely on self-preservation and legal justice. I was no longer the frightened daughter desperately seeking approval from parents who only viewed her as a convenient financial resource to be endlessly exploited without any real consequence. I finally felt completely prepared to face the massive incoming storm that would inevitably destroy the toxic foundation of our family dynamic once the weekend officially concluded. Exactly 9 o'clock on Sunday morning arrived while the 72-hour milestone officially expired amidst a deathly silence coming from my family. I sat perfectly still on my living room sofa while staring at the blank screen of my smartphone waiting for a notification that never materialized. There was absolutely no phone call offering a genuine apology or even a single stolen item returned to my front porch to signal any remorse. Their supreme arrogance had completely overwhelmed any remaining shreds of logical reasoning they might have possessed during the incredibly tense weekend following our confrontation. Mom, alongside Dad, firmly believed that I was merely issuing empty threats, because they assumed a daughter would never actually dare to initiate a lawsuit against her own blood relatives. They comfortably convinced themselves that the traditional hierarchy of our household would easily protect them from facing any real consequences for their blatant criminal theft. The toxic situation rapidly deteriorated much further when my personal cell phone suddenly began receiving an endless flood of harassing text messages from various distant relatives. My parents had deliberately incited these extended family members to aggressively apply immense psychological pressure in a highly coordinated attempt to break my resolve. These misinformed aunts alongside various cousins continuously demanded that I swallow my pride to immediately apologize to Mallory for causing such unnecessary dramatic tension online. They had completely swallowed the fabricated victim narrative without ever bothering to ask for my perspective regarding the missing valuables or the undeniable video evidence. Reading those highly accusatory messages filled me with profound disgust because it highlighted exactly how effectively my parents utilized social manipulation to control the entire family dynamic. The relentless digital harassment finally peaked during the late afternoon when a particularly aggressive phone call shattered the quiet atmosphere of my living room. I reluctantly answered the incoming call only to be immediately blasted by the overwhelming volume of a distant relative completely enraged by my supposed disobedience. "You are tearing this entire family apart over a few meaningless inanimate objects." An uncle's voice rang out full of intense indignation through the phone speaker. He sounded incredibly furious that I would dare to disrupt the comfortable illusion of our perfect family dynamic over a simple financial dispute involving a watch. They unlawfully broke in and actively stole my personal property, so this conversation ends right here. I decisively pressed the end button before blocking his number immediately. I adamantly refused to waste another precious second of my life attempting to rationally explain my valid position to people, choosing to remain willfully blind to the objective truth. I coldly navigated through the complex privacy settings menu on my smartphone to permanently block every single phone number that participated in the coordinated harassment campaign against me. I meticulously restricted my social media profiles to ensure that none of their toxic comments or manipulative direct messages could ever reach my digital notifications again. Creating an impenetrable digital fortress around myself provided a profound sense of relief after enduring several decades of their constant emotional manipulation alongside endless financial extortion. I systematically deleted every lingering voicemail left by my furious relatives to completely sanitize my personal devices from their highly infectious negativity. Sitting inside the incredibly peaceful silence of my home on Sunday evening, I finally opened my personal computer to execute the ultimate consequence against their arrogance. I stared at the glowing monitor for a brief moment before composing a very short email directed to Brian regarding the expiration of the given deadline. I quickly typed out a highly decisive instruction containing only the words necessary to proceed immediately with the formal criminal charges against the perpetrators. Clicking the blue send button officially transferred all the remaining decision-making power directly into the highly capable hands of the formal legal system. A massive weight instantly lifted off my tense shoulders the exact moment the digital message successfully departed from my outbox toward my legal representation. There was no longer any room for emotional hesitation because the incoming storm was now completely out of my control and firmly guided by the strict parameters of the law. I calmly closed my laptop screen while taking a deep breath of fresh air, feeling entirely prepared to face the chaotic aftermath scheduled to arrive the following morning. Early Monday morning, the harsh wail of police sirens aggressively tore through the peacefulness of my parents' suburban neighborhood, permanently ending our fabricated family drama. Law enforcement officers arrived promptly to execute a comprehensive emergency search warrant directly authorized by the irrefutable evidence Brian successfully submitted to the local precinct. The chaotic morning scene completely shattered their supreme arrogant delusions as uniformed officers forcefully escorted Mom, Dad, and Mallory out through their own front door. Profound humiliation was visibly painted across their incredibly pale faces, while dozens of nosy neighbors stood outside their properties, actively watching the unprecedented neighborhood spectacle unfold. They were officially placed into the back of clearly marked patrol vehicles, without any opportunity to further manipulate the public narrative or guilt-trip me. The diligent police officers systematically searched through the entire residence until they successfully recovered the stolen designer accessories, alongside the priceless vintage watch belonging to my grandfather. Witnessing law enforcement officially catalog my stolen belongings directly on their front lawn provided the ultimate vindication against every single gaslighting lie they had continuously told me. The harsh reality of the criminal justice system finally crashed down upon them without leaving any room for misplaced emotional mercy or traditional family forgiveness. Mallory was immediately terminated from her comfortable corporate position, the exact moment her employer discovered the severe felony charges permanently staining her public criminal record. My parents were completely blindsided by the devastating financial consequences resulting from the massive legal fees required to hire competent criminal defense attorneys for their upcoming trials. Their precious retirement savings were completely decimated within weeks because they selfishly chose to illegally steal my property instead of respecting my personal boundaries. During the preliminary court hearing several weeks later, Brian masterfully presented the comprehensive timeline of their systemic psychological abuse, leading directly up to the brazen burglary. The highly experienced magistrate looked absolutely disgusted while listening to the audio recordings, capturing their cruel, mocking laughter during our intense confrontation regarding the stolen valuables. Neither Mom nor Dad could muster the courage to look directly into my eyes while the severe financial penalties and probation terms were officially read aloud. Their previous unshakable arrogance had entirely evaporated under the crushing weight of the strict judicial system that adamantly refused to accept their twisted familial entitlement excuses. The presiding judge eventually reviewed the undeniable video footage alongside their deeply remorseless behavior before officially issuing a permanent civil restraining order against all three individuals. This strictly enforced, legally binding document prohibited them from initiating any form of physical or digital contact with me for the rest of their natural lives. It marked the absolute and final severance of our biological connections, without any acceptable pathways remaining for future reconciliation or fake familial apologies. Replacing every single lock on my doors and upgrading the entire security system represented the final physical barrier, protecting my newfound emotional independence from their toxicity. I learned through the incredibly painful process of litigation that true family is built exclusively upon mutual respect and never upon the continuous exploitation of unconditional love. Standing outside the quiet courthouse after the final verdict was delivered, I felt an incredibly profound sense of absolute liberation washing over my entirely exhausted body. The heavy, invisible chains of endless financial extortion that had comfortably bound me to their toxic demands for over a decade were finally shattered into pieces. I returned to my incredibly peaceful home that evening, knowing nobody would ever violate the sanctity of my personal sanctuary or disrespect my boundaries ever again. Before we officially wrap up today's incredibly intense journey, please do not skip this final segment because we need to discuss the crucial underlying educational message here. Bianca's agonizing experience perfectly highlights why sharing biological DNA should never guarantee automatic immunity from severe legal consequences. Forgiving toxic relatives who consistently trample over your personal boundaries without displaying genuine remorse is essentially handing them a weapon to destroy your mental health repeatedly. Walking away from a highly abusive family dynamic is definitely not an act of selfish cruelty, but rather a highly necessary measure of fundamental self-preservation. Would you have reacted with the exact same level of legal severity if your own parents secretly burglarized your home while you were working? Please share your personal opinions or alternative approaches in the comments section below,